She was traded like a porcelain doll to a monster, meant to cower in the shadow of his fangs. But when the rival Alpha dragged her onto the blood-soaked dirt of the dueling ring, he didn't realize he had just challenged the most lethal predator in the kingdom. The wind howling through the jagged peaks of the Silver Ridge Mountains carried the scent of pine, frost, and the unmistakable heavy musk of predators. Within the towering stone walls of High Reach Keep, humanity was a fragile, fleeting thing, tolerated only when it served a purpose. Lady Rosamond of House Harrington was precisely that, a purpose. To the naked eye, Rosamond was the epitome of aristocratic frailty. She possessed a ghostly pallor, her collarbones sharp enough to cast shadows beneath the heavy velvet of her northern cloaks. When she was handed over to the Werewolf King to seal the borders of her father's vulnerable agricultural lands, the entire Lycan court had scoffed. Lord Harrington had traded his youngest, most insignificant daughter to buy his people 50 years of peace. Valerian, the Alpha King of the Silver Ridge Pack, had accepted the treaty with quiet resignation. Standing at an imposing 6'4", Valerian was a terrifying force of nature, possessing a wolf form as black as pitch and a reputation forged in the brutal territorial wars of the previous decade. Yet, as he watched his new bride shiver by the hearth in the grand hall, a profound sense of pity settled in his chest. "She looks as though a stiff breeze would snap her spine," whispered Finnick, Valerian's second-in-command, leaning against a stone pillar. Finnick's golden eyes tracked the human woman as she delicately sipped from a goblet of warmed, spiced wine. "The pack respects strength, Valerian. They will never bow to a Luna who flinches when a hound barks." "She is not here to lead them in battle, Finnick," Valerian replied, his deep voice a low rumble that vibrated in the damp air of the keep. "She is here to secure the grain shipments for the winter and keep her father's armies out of our southern forests. I will protect her. That is my duty as her alpha and her husband." Valerian made every effort to shield his human bride from the brutal realities of his court. He banned the traditional blood sparring from the courtyard when she was present. He ordered the kitchen staff to prepare her meats thoroughly cooked, hiding the raw, dripping haunches his kind preferred. In their shared chambers, he treated her like spun glass. He never raised his voice, and he certainly never allowed his eyes to flash with the golden light of his inner beast. Rosamond played her part to perfection. She lowered her gaze when the larger wolves entered the room. She gasped softly at the violent tales the elders told by the fire. She allowed Valerian to wrap her in heavy furs, murmuring soft, breathless thanks that made the formidable Alpha feel fiercely protective. What Valerian did not know, what no one in the sprawling stone fortress knew, was that Rosamond's trembling was not born of fear, but of rigid, calculated control. Before Lord Harrington had dragged her into the glittering, treacherous world of court politics, Rosamond had been an unwanted bastard, hidden away in a remote coastal abbey. Her guardian had not been a priest, but a banished master-at-arms named Cailan, a man who had fought in the brutal gladiator pits of the eastern continent. For 15 years, Cailan had molded her. He had handed her a blunted broadsword before she could read, teaching her that a woman's survival lay not in her beauty, but in the lethal efficiency of her wrists and the coldness of her heart. Underneath the thick velvet gowns, Rosamond's arms were corded with dense, wiry muscle. The palms of her hands were thick with calluses, carefully disguised by the application of rose oils and silk gloves. She flinched at the bark of hounds only because she was analyzing their strike distance. She stared at the floor, not in submission, but to study the footwork of the wolves pacing around her. She allowed Valerian to coddle her, because a pampered, ignored bride was a bride who had free reign of the castle. She spent her nights mapping the fortress, memorizing the patrol routes of the wolf guards, and noting the exact vital points of a lycanthrope's anatomy from the medical tomes in the keep's dusty library. One evening, nearly 2 months into their marriage, Valerian returned from a border patrol, tracking mud and crimson blood onto the stone floors. A rogue bear had wounded 2 of his scouts. Rosamond, sitting by the fire with a piece of embroidery, watched as a healer hurriedly stitched a deep gash on Valerian's forearm. "You should not look upon this, Rosamond," Valerian said softly, his brow furrowed in concern as he noticed her staring at the wound. "Return to your chambers. The sight of blood will only give you nightmares." Rosamond stood, her silk skirts rustling. She offered him a wide, watery, perfectly feigned look of distress. "As you wish, my lord. Please, see that you are healed quickly." As she turned away, her demeanor instantly shifted. The frightened doe vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical observer. She had noticed the exact depth of the bear's claw mark, the time it took for the werewolf's enhanced healing to clot the blood, and the specific herbs the healer applied. She was a ghost in her own home, a weapon resting quietly in its sheath. But the peaceful charade of the porcelain bride was not destined to last. The scent of war was already blowing in from the northern peaks, and it carried the stench of the Ironwood Pack. The Ironwood Pack, led by the ruthless Alpha Bastion, controlled the desolate, resource-starved tundra to the north. Bastion was a massive, scarred brute of a man, his face a map of violent conquests, his ambition as boundless as his cruelty. For years he had coveted the lush hunting grounds and the strategic mountain passes controlled by Silver Ridge. The treaty between Valerian and the humans had infuriated him. It effectively blocked his only route to expand into the fertile human valleys. When the first snows of winter began to cap the mountains, Bastion forced a diplomatic summit at High Reach Keep. By ancient Lycan law, Valerian could not refuse a parley without appearing cowardly, an act that would invite rebellion from within his own ranks. The great hall was transformed for the summit. The tension was suffocating, thick enough to taste. Bastion arrived with an entourage of 30 heavily armed, feral-looking wolves. They marched into the keep with insolent swagger, their eyes daring Valerian's guards to make a move. That night, a grand feast was held. The air was heavy with the smell of roasting meats, dark ale, and the underlying pheromones of dozens of apex predators asserting dominance. Valerian sat at the head of the heavy oak table, his posture rigid, his golden eyes fixed on Bastion. To his right sat Rosamond, draped in a gown of midnight blue, a heavy silver necklace, the mark of the Luna, resting against her pale throat. Bastion tore a chunk of meat from a bone with his teeth, chewing loudly before wiping his grease-stained mouth on the back of his hand. His dark, glittering eyes locked onto Rosamond. "Tell me, Valerian," Bastion boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, silencing the low murmurs of the hall. "Is the harvest so poor in Silver Ridge that you must take human scraps for a mate? She smells of fear and milk. I wager my youngest pup could snap her neck by accident." The hall went dead silent. Next to Valerian, Finnick's hand dropped to the hilt of his dagger. Valerian's jaw tightened, a low, dangerous growl vibrating in his chest. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his goblet. "My Luna is not a subject for your amusement, Bastion," Valerian warned, his voice a lethal whisper that carried across the room. "Mind your tongue, or I will remove it." Bastion threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You threaten me over a human? A fragile little bird who shivers when the wind blows?" He stood up, leaning his heavy hands on the table. "You have grown soft, Valerian. The humans have infected you." The Silver Ridge Pack deserves a true alpha, one who mates with strength, not political convenience. Valerian surged to his feet, his chair crashing to the stone floor behind him. The sound of a dozen swords being drawn echoed through the hall as both packs sprang up, teeth bared, eyes glowing. "Stand down!" Valerian roared, his alpha command washing over the room. The sheer force of his will forced the younger Ironwood wolves to whimper and avert their eyes, but Bastion merely smiled, a predatory grin that revealed slightly elongated canines. "I am not here to start a slaughter in your dining hall, Valerian," Bastion said smoothly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I am here to invoke the ancient rites, the rite of the Luna." A collective gasp swept through the Silver Ridge elders. Valerian froze, the blood draining from his face. The Rite of the Luna was a barbaric, archaic law, written into the original lycanthrope accords, centuries ago. If a visiting alpha formally questioned the lineage or strength of the host's Luna, claiming her weakness jeopardized the safety of the werewolf nation, he could demand a trial by combat. "You are a coward, Bastion," Valerian spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "You hide behind a forgotten law to steal my territory. It is the law of our ancestors," Bastion bellowed, turning to address the elders of both packs. "This human stains our heritage. I challenge the Luna of Silver Ridge to a duel of honor against myself. If she survives, my pack will retreat and swear fealty to your borders. If she dies, Valerian relinquishes his crown, and Silver Ridge belongs to Ironwood." "I will not allow it," Valerian snarled, his eyes bleeding from human brown to glowing, predatory gold. Claws tore through the leather of his gloves. "I will fight you myself." "If you fight in her stead," Bastion replied, his smile widening into something truly malevolent. "You forfeit the crown by default. The law is clear. The Luna must defend her own honor, or the Alpha admits he was foolish enough to mate with a weakling." Valerian looked down at Rosamond. She was staring at her plate, her hands trembling violently in her lap. The sight shattered his heart. Bastion had trapped him perfectly. If Valerian fought, he lost his kingdom, his pack, and likely his life in the ensuing civil war, leaving Rosamond unprotected anyway. If he let her fight, it was an execution. Bastion was a monster who delighted in tearing his opponents limb from limb. "The challenge is invalid," Finnick shouted, stepping forward. "She is human. She has no wolf to call upon." "Then she should not be wearing the silver of a Luna," Bastion countered triumphantly. He turned his mocking gaze to Rosamond. "What say you, little bird? Will you forfeit your husband's crown, or will you come down to the dirt and bleed for it?" Valerian reached out, gently placing a massive hand on Rosamond's trembling shoulder. "Do not speak, Rosamond," he said softly, his voice thick with sorrow. "I will step down. I will take you away from here. We will go south to your father's lands. I care not for the crown if it means your death." It was a staggering admission. The Alpha King of the Silver Ridge, the most fearsome warrior of a generation, was willing to give up his ancestral home to save a human girl he had known for barely 2 months. A murmur of shock rippled through his pack. Some looked at him with newfound reverence, others with deep disgust. Rosamond stopped trembling. She looked at Valerian's hand resting on her shoulder. She noted the sincerity in his voice, the desperate protective warmth in his golden eyes. For 15 years, she had been a pawn. Her father had used her. Her trainer had honed her. But this werewolf, this terrifying beast of the north, was willing to throw away his entire world simply to keep her breathing. A strange, unfamiliar spark ignited in her chest. Rosamond slowly stood up. She reached up and unclasped the heavy midnight blue velvet cloak from her shoulders, letting it pool onto the stone floor. Beneath it, she wore a simple, unrestrictive riding tunic of dark leather and linen. She turned to face Bastien. Her spine, usually curved in feigned submission, snapped perfectly straight. The terrified, wide-eyed gaze vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, chilling apathy. The shift in her demeanor was so sudden, so physically jarring, that the murmurs in the hall instantly died. "I accept your terms, Alpha Bastien," Rosamond said. Her voice, usually a breathy whisper, rang out clear, cold, and hard as tempered steel. Valerian stared at her, paralyzed by confusion. "Rosamond." No, she didn't look at her husband. She kept her eyes locked on Bastien, her gaze drifting down to his thick neck, analyzing the exact space between his collarbone and his jawline. "Tomorrow at high noon, in the courtyard," Rosamond stated, her tone entirely devoid of fear. "But I have one condition to add to your ancient rite," Bastien sneered, though a flicker of unease crossed his eyes at her sudden composure. "Speak it, human." Rosamond stepped around the table, her movements fluid, devoid of the clumsy hesitation she had faked for weeks. She looked up at the massive, scarred Alpha. "When I win," she said softly, ensuring only the wolves with their enhanced hearing could catch the lethal promise in her words. "Your pack does not swear fealty to my husband. When I win, the Ironwood pack belongs to me." The morning sun cast a harsh, blinding glare over the snow-dusted courtyard of High Reach Keep. The arena was a massive circle of packed, frozen earth, surrounded by towering, centuries-old stone walls, where hundreds of werewolves now gathered in breathless anticipation. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a dense, suffocating sea of heavy furs, dark leather, and glittering, predatory eyes, their collective breath plumed in the freezing northern air like smoke from a battlefield. The silence pressing down on the courtyard was absolute and unnerving, heavy with the grim expectation of an inevitable slaughter. Valerian paced wildly at the edge of the dueling ring, his boots leaving deep, chaotic impressions in the frost. He had spent the entire night, from dusk until dawn, begging Rosamond to flee. He had offered her his fastest horses, chests of untraceable gold, and a sworn, heavily armed escort to the southern ports. She had refused every frantic plea with the same maddening, serene silence, merely sharpening a massive blade by the hearth. Now, watching her step out from beneath the heavy iron portcullis, Valerian felt a hollow, agonizing despair settle deep within his chest. Rosamond wore no ceremonial armor, no velvet gowns, and no silver crowns. She was dressed in a meticulously fitted tunic of reinforced boiled leather and dark, flexible riding breeches, allowing for maximum, unhindered mobility. Her dark hair was braided tightly against her scalp. In her hands, she carried a weapon that immediately drew confused, mocking murmurs from the lichen crowd. It was not a dainty dueling rapier or a decorative nobleman's dagger. It was a massive, two-handed executioner's greatsword. The blade was a masterpiece of dark, folded steel, bearing the distinct historical maker's mark of Andrea Ferrara, a legendary human weaponsmith whose authentic forged blades were rumored to cut through solid iron and bone without dulling. The hilt was wrapped in rough, functional wire, and the crossguard was entirely unadorned. It was a weapon of pure, utilitarian violence, nearly as tall as the woman wielding it. Bastien laughed, a harsh, booming sound that echoed violently off the ancient battlements. He stood in the exact center of the ring, having already stripped off his heavy winter furs to reveal a torso corded with thick, unnatural muscle and jagged scars. He did not fully shift into his supreme wolf form. Doing so against a mere human female would be seen by the packs as an admission that he needed his beast's strength to win. Instead, he allowed the terrifying transformation to ripple just beneath his skin. His muscles expanded grotesquely, thick black veins throbbing along his arms and neck, his nails elongated with sickening cracks into 5-inch, razor-sharp talons, and his jaw extended slightly, exposing rows of yellowed, serrated teeth. "You bring a man's toy to a wolf's fight, little bird," Bastian sneered, cracking his thick neck from side to side. "I will snap that ancient relic in half, and then I will break your delicate spine over my knee. I will make sure Valerian watches the life leave your terrified eyes before I take his throne." Rosamund said absolutely nothing. She stepped precisely into the center of the ring, her boots crunching softly on the pristine frost. She assumed a classic grounded middle guard, the heavy Ferrara blade angled perfectly in front of her face. Her breathing slowed to a rhythmic, almost hypnotic pace. The sprawling world around her instantly narrowed down to the mathematical space between herself and the hulking Alpha. She remembered Kaelin's gritty voice, echoing from the dusty, sun-baked sparring rings of her youth. Wolves fight with blind rage. They rely on overwhelming kinetic force and biological intimidation. You will fight with geometry, Rosamund. You will fight with applied physics. Let their blinding anger be the heavy anvil upon which you break them. "Begin the rite," howled an ancient elder from the stone balcony above. Bastian did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He launched himself forward with terrifying, explosive speed, becoming a massive blur of muscle and deadly claws. He roared a blood-curdling battle cry that made the courtyard stones vibrate, aiming a sweeping, brutal backhand strike directly at her head. It was a blow explicitly meant to decapitate her with raw, blunt force. Rosamund did not attempt to block. Blocking a werewolf's furious strike with a rigid posture would instantly shatter both her forearms. Instead, she executed a flawless, perfectly timed slip step. She dropped her center of gravity instantly, pivoting smoothly on her back heel as Bastian's lethal claws cleaved empty air mere inches above her scalp. The immense forward momentum of his missed strike carried his heavy body slightly off balance, leaving his left flank dangerously exposed for a microsecond. With a sharp, explosive exhale, Rosamund torqued her hips, bringing the heavy greatsword around in a devastating horizontal arc. The dark, folded steel bit deeply into the thick muscle of Bastian's side, sliding brutally between his lower ribs. Bastian roared in profound agony and utter shock. Snapping his body around, he backhanded her violently across the chest before she could completely retract her blade. The crushing blow sent Rosamund skidding backward through the snow, her reinforced boots digging twin trenches into the frozen dirt to forcibly halt her momentum. A collective, horrified gasp rose from the Silver Ridge wolves. Valerian surged violently against the iron barrier, screaming her name, his eyes blazing a terrifying, luminous gold as he prepared to intervene and forfeit everything. Rosamund spat a thick mouthful of bright blood onto the blinding white snow. Her ribs ached fiercely, a burning agony radiating through her chest. But they were not broken. Her boiled leather armor and her strategic exhalation had absorbed the worst of the glancing impact. She methodically adjusted her tight grip on the wire hilt. The cold, chilling apathy on her pale face had not wavered for a single second. Bastian clutched his heavily bleeding side, his dark eyes widened with manic disbelief. A human had drawn his blood. A tiny, fragile human bride had pierced his iron-like skin. The realization ignited a blinding, feral rage within his chest. "I will tear you to bloody pieces," he bellowed, fully surrendering his mind to his inner beast. His bones cracked, lengthened, and violently reshaped. Coarse black fur erupted rapidly across his skin. In mere seconds, a monstrous, bipedal wolf creature stood in his place, towering 9 feet tall over the bloody snow. He lunged again, abandoning all tactical strategy, swiping wildly and maniacally with both sets of massive claws. Rosamund became an untouchable phantom. She utilized the advanced, fluid footwork of her secretive martial training, weaving seamlessly through the lethal, chaotic flurry of attacks. She parried gracefully with the flat of her blade, deliberately redirecting his massive claws into the frozen dirt rather than meeting his overwhelming strength head-on. She moved with a calculated mechanical precision that was deeply unsettling for the surrounding predators to watch. She was waiting for her exact opening. She knew the lycanthrope anatomy perfectly from Valerian's medical tomes. She knew that when a werewolf fully shifted and allowed unbridled rage to take over, their heart rate tripled, their muscles tightened blindly, and they inevitably overextended their strikes. It happened on his ferocious 4th lunge. Bastian brought both massive fists down in a crushing, desperate overhead smash meant to crush her skull. Rosamund sidestepped flawlessly to the right, as his fists slammed violently into the frozen earth, cratering the ground and sending chunks of ice flying. His massive, heavily muscled neck was left completely, fatally exposed. This was the exact mathematical moment. Rosamund stepped deep into his shattered guard. She planted her lead foot firmly into the earth, drawing every ounce of kinetic power from the solid ground up through her calves, her thighs, and her twisted core. She swung the immense great sword in a perfect horizontal crescent of lethal force. The ancient steel sang a high, deadly note as it cut through the frigid air. The heavy blade struck the side of Bastian's thick neck with the unstoppable force of a falling guillotine. It cleanly severed the thick tendons, smashed brutally through the dense cervical vertebrae, and exited the opposite side in a magnificent, horrifying spray of brilliant crimson blood. Time seemed to freeze within the courtyard. Bastian's massive, headless, fur-covered body remained kneeling rigidly for a single, surreal second. Then it collapsed backward into the blood-stained snow with a heavy, sickening thud that echoed off the high walls. The rival Alpha's severed head rolled continuously across the icy ground, finally coming to a halt directly at the base of the iron gates. The silence in the courtyard returned, absolute and paralyzing. The fierce wind, howling through the jagged peaks, seemed to die away entirely. Hundreds of seasoned werewolves, the ultimate apex predators of the northern realms, stared in uncomprehending, breathless horror at the frail human woman standing victorious in the center of the ring, her ancient sword dripping heavily with the dark blood of a conquered king. Rosamund calmly pulled a clean linen scrap from her belt and wiped the steaming blood from her blade. She sheathed the great sword, breathing perfectly steady. She turned her piercing gaze toward the surviving Ironwood wolves, who remained frozen in profound shock. "The ancient rite is complete," Rosamund's voice rang out, chillingly calm across the arena. She pointed a bloody finger at the trembling second in command. "Your Alpha challenged my lineage. He arrogantly gambled his life and lost. By the blood laws your ancestors wrote, Ironwood territory and all its warriors now belong to me. Kneel." For an agonizing moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the Ironwood wolves dropped heavily to their knees in the snow. Absolute submission cascaded rapidly through their bewildered ranks until every northern wolf bowed low before the delicate human bride. Valerian shattered the heavy gate latch with an explosive blow. He sprinted frantically into the arena, ignoring the kneeling enemy wolves, and stopped inches from Rosamond. His chest heaved, his golden eyes wide with a chaotic mixture of intense awe and absolute confusion. "Rosamond," he breathed, reaching to touch her pale face. "What are you?" "I am precisely what my ambitious father made me, Valerian," she replied quietly, allowing her impenetrable warrior facade to crack. "Lord Harrington did not send me to secure a peace treaty. He sent an assassin." Valerian recoiled. "An assassin? He ordered his daughter to murder me." "If it became tactically necessary," Rosamond nodded gravely, watching betrayal wash over his rugged features. "My father is a relentlessly ambitious man. He knew Bastion planned to break the territorial lines this winter. What you do not know is that my father and Bastion struck a treasonous bargain. Bastion explicitly promised my father the fertile valley for unopposed passage through our lands. I found the wax-sealed letters inside Bastion's saddlebags. A furious murmur erupted from the Silver Ridge elders. Finnick vaulted over the stone railing, landing heavily. "They conspired to wipe our pack out? And your father sent you here to strike Valerian from behind?" "Yes," Rosamond admitted frankly, looking around without shame. "I was brutally trained by Kaelin for 15 agonizing years. I was placed in your private bed so I could quietly slit your throat while you slept, leaving your pack vulnerable for Bastion's invasion." Valerian stared down at her, the shocking betrayal warring with the reality of what she had just accomplished. "Then why?" he asked, his deep voice cracking. "Why did you save me?" Rosamond looked up at the towering king. For the very first time since she arrived, she smiled genuinely. "Because, Valerian, my father is a pathetic coward who views me as a mindless weapon," she said softly, gently cupping his jaw. "But you are the terrifying beast of the north, yet you treated me with nothing but absolute gentleness. When Bastion cornered you today, you were willing to throw away your crown and pride just to save my life. You proved yourself a true king, and a true king deserves a queen willing to slaughter his enemies." She turned to face the gathered packs. "Lord Harrington's cowardly treaty is permanently void. I no longer answer to him, and neither do you. I am the true Luna of Silver Ridge, and the blood conqueror of Ironwood. If the arrogant human lords ever attempt to cross our borders, they will face a massive, united kingdom. They will face me." A roar erupted from the courtyard. Finnick dropped to one knee. "All hail the Wolf Queen!" he shouted fiercely. The cry was taken up by the rest. Hundreds of werewolves dropped to their knees, voices joining in a deafening chorus. Valerian stood proudly amidst the roars. He dropped gracefully to one knee beside his fiercely loyal warriors, taking her calloused hand gently and pressing his lips reverently to her knuckles. "My beautiful Luna," Valerian vowed softly. "My queen." The legend of the human Luna spread rapidly across the continents, becoming a bloody fairy tale whispered in the dark. A stark reminder that sometimes the monster hiding in the woods is absolutely nothing compared to the girl waiting patiently in the clearing. Thank you for listening to this epic tale of betrayal, hidden strength, and werewolf romance. If you were captivated by Rosamond's lethal secret and Valerian's devotion, please hit that like button and share this story with your fellow fantasy lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling dramas, alpha wolves, and badass heroines every single week. Ring the bell so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next epic fantasy adventure right here.